Human rights organisations say the conflict in Syria is having a devastating impact on children, and their latest reports reveal shocking figures about those caught up in the conflict. 18,000 Syrian children have been killed since March 2011. 7.5 million children in Syria are in immediate need of humanitarian aid. 2 million are living as refugees in foreign countries, and 2.6 million are not in school because a quarter of all school buildings in Syria have been destroyed. 10% of Syrian refugee children are forced to work, with nearly half of all refugee families partially reliant on their children's income. Well, for more on all of this, we're now joined by Simon Ingram from UNICEF. Simon, thank you very much for your time. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Those figures then that I've just mentioned, they show the extent to which children are being affected by this conflict. But there's also reports now that children under the age of 15 are being used in combat as well. What have you heard about these reports? What can you tell us?
I mean, the longer this terrible conflict continues, the more grievous and appalling the repercussions for children, and we see them on every level. The one that you're referring to refers to those who are caught up, who actually become embroiled in the fighting, take part in the fighting themselves. It's a trend that we've seen since the beginning of the conflict, as one sees in many conflicts globally. But whereas at the start, the children tended to be older, and they tended to come voluntarily, if you like, and that they were playing a more subsidiary role in the conflict. They were carrying, being used as porters, for example, or as medical aids to fighting groups. The difference that we're seeing now is that the children who are becoming recruited into the fighting are younger, and they're actually taking part in the violence, in the combat themselves. In some cases, actually taking part in using weapons, and even in places taking part in execution. So this is a really horrific trend, and another indication of how children are paying such a terrible price for this war.
Even the children that are, and I use the word loosely here, fortunate enough to get out of Syria, the ones who make it to Europe. I mean, nearly a third of the refugees reaching Europe are children, but they also face challenges as well. What sort of challenges and difficulties do those children face, those who have fled perhaps immediate danger?
Well, the number of children who are becoming refugees, and the bulk of those refugees, of course, are still in the region, in Lebanon, in Turkey, in Jordan. But those, if you like, in one sense, are the lucky ones who've managed to get out, to escape the direct impact of the conflict inside Syria itself. But once they do that, of course, they risk all sorts of other losses to their chances, to their futures, especially, of course, the loss of their education. And this we are now really seeking to focus much more public and political attention on the long-term repercussions of the loss of education for a whole generation of Syrian children. And that, of course, means that the loss of a future for the country itself. It means that hopes of rebuilding Syria in some manageable, governable form in the future are going to be that much harder, because the children won't have the basic skills, the basic learning that they need in order to play a part in that rebuilding process. So we're asking for much more focus, much more investment on the particular area of education. And it isn't just, by the way, the 2.6, 2.7 million Syrian children who are out of school, but well over 1 million other children, vulnerable children in host communities, in countries that are hosting refugees. They are out of school, they are paying a price as well.
Are you finding that there is the political will in the international community to help with what you're talking about there, the education for these refugees?
Well, of course, there has been progress. There have been enormous amount of generosity by many countries around the world, but quite simply, it hasn't been enough. And that's why we're still seeing such a huge gap between the assistance and the education, specifically the learning opportunities that we're able to provide along with our many partners, and the needs of the children. There's a massive gulf, if you like, between them, which is why next week, the donor conference, which is taking place in London on February the 4th is such a crucial moment. And it's one where we will be raising with donors from all around the world, and they will all be there, the need to make an investment, make a sustainable investment in these children's future, in their education. And we'll be looking for something like $1.4 billion over each of the coming 5 years in order to get those 4 million children that I mentioned into some opportunity of learning and really rescue the hopes of a generation.
OK, Simon Ingram from UNICEF, thank you very much for your time.